Hi everybody, I'm Sin. Welcome to the Black Lodge, where today we're going to do the Twin Peaks book tag. I looked to see if this already existed, and it did not, so I had to make my own tag, where I take 15 different characters from the show. I focus mainly on the first part of the series. I didn't go into the return. And I feel like almost that I could do a second part to this with more characters. I tried to choose the most prominent ones. And so I take characters from the show and I match them with a book that sort of matches their personality. So let's get into it. So the first character we'll start with is Laura Palmer. And Laura Palmer, the whole show starts out, if you have seen it, with her dead wrapped in plastic. So a murder mystery is the first book. And I'll have all the info down below if you want to do this tag as well, if you're a fan of Twin Peaks. And I was going to do 10 books originally, but I was like, I'm leaving out characters, so I feel like should be included in this. So without further ado, so Laura Palmer, for her, murder mystery. And for that, I chose Lake of the Dead by Audrey Bjerke, which is a crime/horror/paranormal novel from 1942, which was recently translated into English, and it's considered one of Norway's best ever written crime novels. So the next one is her father, Leland Palmer, who kind of had like a split personality, one might say. So I went with a book about split personalities. For that, I chose Piranesi by Susanna Clark. And the character in this, he's in this weird in-between, maybe dimensions, and has forgotten who he used to be. So he has, one might say, two different personalities. And the obvious one would have been Jekyll and Hyde, but I wanted something a little more that I had recently read. So the next one is for Dale Cooper. And for Dale Cooper, this whole investigation into the murder, all of it kind of had like paranormal elements to the story. And I mean, this is made by David Lynch, and we all know how weird things get when it's a Lynchian type show or movie. So with the paranormal investigation, I chose a book that was actually written by one of my friends called Theoretical Weirdo by John E.L. Tenney. And he goes into a bunch of different stuff in this book about like paranormal investigation and all kinds of stuff that aligns with the paranormal and the weird. And it's a really fantastic read. So a book of paranormal investigation is what I chose for Dale Cooper. The next one we have is Audrey Horne. And she's kind of like Little Girl Lost and somewhat sultry. And I went with Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice because I thought it was dark and sultry, and it just, for some reason, when I think of Audrey Horne, she's like this kind of sexy and sultry, and so Interview with the Vampire just, to me, seemed along those lines. So the next character, we have the Log Lady, and for her, I figured a forest-related book would be good. She's always carrying around her log because her log has something to tell you. And I chose The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben. And this talks about the different, like how trees communicate with each other in the forest. Quite a fascinating read. It's a nonfiction book, and I thought it was very appropriate for the Log Lady. So the next character we have is Bobby Briggs. He's kind of that, like, charming, kind of a jerk at the same time, gets into some bad stuff, like selling drugs. So I kind of was like, all right, a book that has to do with drugs, sex, and rock and roll for Bobby Briggs. And for that one, I chose How to Kill a Rock Star by Tiffanie Debartolo. And there's drugs, sex, and rock and roll in it. Next up, we have Sheriff Harry S. Truman. He's the sheriff of the town, and then when the whole thing with Laura Palmer happens, he has to investigate. So I thought, like, an investigative novel, you could do a crime novel and whatnot. I went with something a little more on the paranormal edge, and we have Warlock Holmes. A Study in Brimstone, which is, it's kind of a spin on Sherlock Holmes, but it's Warlock Holmes. So there's paranormal elements. It's a super fun read. It's by G.S. Denning. I had a lot of fun with this book. And a funny story about this book, we were actually doing a stream over on Twitch, my partner and I. You can stream, they have an agreement with Amazon Prime where you can stream stuff. So we were streaming Hellier, because obviously I talk about Hellier all the time, so I'm obsessed. One of the people who ended up watching, I was babbling on about how I love books and my favorite movies are books, because I don't really watch a lot of movies. And it turned out her husband was an author and this was her husband, and I don't know how the conversation went, but they ended up sending me this book and it was really fantastic. All right, so next up we have James Hurley. He's kind of like a loner. He had dated Laura, and he's always on his motorcycle. So I thought, all right, a book about motorcycles, or has a motorcycle-esque theme. And so I chose Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. I've read it a few times. It's a nonfiction book, and it talks about, making sure to take care of your motorcycle, but then also the guy's relationship with his son, and just, it's a really fantastic read that I would highly recommend. All right, so the next character we have is Benjamin Horne, the owner of the Great Northern Lodge. I don't know, he kind of sucks. I figured a book about that has to do with like hotels, or maybe owning a lodge or something of that sort. So centered around or takes place in a hotel. So I went with The Shining by Stephen King for obvious reasons. It's weird, it's scary, and Stephen King is great, and it just seemed to fit into the Twin Peaks kind of vibe we got going on. And then we also have his brother, Jerry. Jerry likes the finer things in life, and he also likes to, indulge in different pharmaceuticals, drugs. So for Jerry, the electric Kool-Aid acid test by Tom Wolfe seemed appropriate to me. Good old Jerry. All right, so next we have Shelley Johnson, and she's, your hometown girl. She is in a bad relationship, and then she tries to get out of it, and it's just a weird thing. So I chose to have the book theme be a book about hometowns, or your hometown. And so I chose one that's not maybe quite that theme, but since we're in Twin Peaks, I chose Black Mad Wheel, which takes place or starts out in Detroit, and that is where I am from. I was born and raised in Detroit. Now I live in the suburbs outside of it. So Black Mad Wheel by Josh Malerman. I'd be remiss if I didn't add a book by Josh Malerman, let's be honest. This book is awesome, and it's so weird, and the concept's pretty wild. All right, so next up we have Bob. Oh, Bob. He's not in here with me, is he? Always watch out for Bob when you're in the Black Lodge. I think he's out in the world right now, which is even more scary. So Bob, we chose a book about spirit possession, because Bob is Bob is Bob. So for this one, we chose The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, and it's a book about spirit possession, so it seemed appropriate for Bob. All right, so the next one we have is Donna Hayward, who is Laura Palmer's best friend. And so for this one, I chose a book about best friends. And I kind of tied it into the theme of where Laura was found, and it's A Song Below Water. And this is a fantasy book about two best friends, and it's about sirens from mythological times. It's just a really great read. Next up, we have The Eccentric Psychiatrist, Dr. Jacoby. And for this one, we chose a psychological thriller, which we chose In Another Light by A.J. Banner, which I recently read. I actually have a standalone review for this. There's a couple of these books I have standalone reviews for, so I will link those down on the channel as well. So I'll have all the types of books, the books and their authors, and then any of the books that I have standalone reviews. So that'll all be down below. So In Another Light, this was a psychological thriller that kind of what happens when a person is kind of just driven to their edge by grief and almost losing themselves. and it's a really great read. It's a shorter book, so that is for the Dr. Jacoby. And then I figured he is a character in this, and he's so weird. So David Lynch, aka Gordon Cole, and I chose for him because what goes on in David Lynch's mind, we all wonder. And I swear, David Lynch is my spirit animal. You know, like, everyone has that question, like, who would you want to meet if you could meet someone famous and have dinner with them? David Lynch, hands down. So his book I chose for him since he is so strange and he makes these amazing films and amazing shows. I chose House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. And if you've read this book, you know how freaking weird it is. Parts of it are upside down, and it's got like little, like, here's some notes, and it's like one of the weirdest books I've ever read. And I feel like David Lynch is one of the most intriguing and weird minds of this world and planet, and maybe interdimensionally as well. And House of Leaves I thought was a good representation for him. So I think I might do a part 2 to this to include other characters, and then I also thought about maybe doing some from The Return. So we'll see. We might do that. Thank you everyone for joining me today in the Black Lodge. If you had fun hanging out, hit that like button. Boop it. Come back. See me again. And we'll talk about more weird stuff in books because it's awesome. So until next time, we'll see you later. And remember, the owls are not what they seem.